On November 1, 2018, a WOW Air Airbus A321, carrying 193 passengers from Keflavik International Airport in Iceland to Baltimore, Maryland, was in the process of ascending when the pilots were alarmed by a warning from the engine monitoring system. They observed that the oil level in one of the aircraft's engines was decreasing at an alarming rate. Within moments, the oil had been completely depleted, leaving the aircraft thousands of feet above the Atlantic Ocean. The pilots were compelled to respond swiftly to this critical situation to safeguard the lives of all individuals on board. This incident marks the narrative of WOW Air Flight 117. WOW Air Flight 117 was a standard operation scheduled to take off on November 1, 2018, from Keflavik International Airport in Iceland, destined for Baltimore/Washington International Thurgood Marshall Airport in Maryland. The aircraft assigned to this flight was a one-year-old Airbus, a A321-200, registered as TFWIN, which had logged over 7,000 flight hours at that point. It had recently undergone a comprehensive C-check inspection at Adria Tehnika in Ljubljana Airport, Slovenia. A C-check is a thorough examination process that assesses nearly every system essential to the aircraft's operation. Given the extensive nature of this inspection, it is conducted at relatively long intervals, determined by the number of flight cycles or months in service. If any component or system of the aircraft is identified as non-functional or deteriorated during a C-check, it is typically repaired, replaced, or upgraded to ensure the aircraft remains in optimal condition for safe and efficient operation. However, in this particular case, those measures were not sufficient. The individual responsible for overseeing the upgrade procedures inadvertently committed a significant and potentially hazardous mistake during the installation of a critical instrument. This occurred after the A321 had successfully completed 13 flight legs without any complications following its C-check inspection. Given this flawless performance, it would have been reasonable for both the engineers and the crew to have confidence in the thoroughness of the checks and repairs conducted. The aircraft's impeccable operation likely provided reassurance that all issues had been adequately addressed. This sentiment would have been shared by the two pilots operating Flight 117. The flight crew consisted of a 45-year-old captain who had accumulated over 8,500 flight hours, making him more experienced than the aircraft itself, with approximately 4,000 of those hours logged as a captain. Accompanying him was a 43-year-old first officer who had just over 2,500 flight hours. On Flight 117, the pilots were supported by 5 cabin crew members and 186 passengers. The captain was designated as the pilot monitoring, while the first officer was tasked with flying the aircraft. The anticipated duration of the journey was around 6 hours. On that unfortunate day, the captain performed his customary walk-around checks to verify that all essential components of the aircraft were in proper working order. At first glance, everything appeared to be in order, and he felt confident in his assessment. However, unbeknownst to him, a significant threat to the safety of the flight was concealed in an area beyond his line of sight. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the pilots monitored the critical flight systems. The internal safety checks were confirmed to be functioning correctly, instilling the pilots with the necessary confidence to initiate the flight procedures. Subsequently, 186 passengers boarded the aircraft and took their seats in anticipation of takeoff. After completing all required checklists, the pilots sought clearance from the airport's control tower to proceed to the runway. The weather along the flight path was cold and overcast, yet deemed moderate enough to not raise any concerns regarding the flight. The aircraft then pushed back from the gate and navigated towards the designated runway, where the pilots requested and received takeoff clearance at approximately 3:48 p.m. local time. The plane began its roll down the runway, and within moments, Flight 117 was airborne. However, it was not long before the first indication of trouble emerged. After a few uneventful minutes during the ascent, the pilots received an unusual alert from the aircraft's ECOM system, indicating that the oil quantity for engine number 2 had inexplicably dropped to around 3 liters. This alarming warning was particularly concerning, as it represented less than 1/6 of the oil quantity recorded prior to departure. The alert occurred when Flight 117 was approximately 7,000 feet in the air, heightening the pilot's anxiety, given that nearly 18.5 liters had been documented in each engine before the flight, with over 15 liters mysteriously missing from one of them. Initially, this situation may have appeared to be an anomaly. The initial reading appeared erroneous, as other related metrics on the flight computers indicated normal functioning. However, if there was no error present, the pilots faced a significant predicament. Similar to any other machinery, oil plays a vital role in lubricating essential mechanical components of an aircraft, thereby preventing wear due to friction and overheating, which could lead to severe damage. While consulting the aircraft's quick reference handbook, the pilots continued their ascent, diligently monitoring the oil temperature and pressure. Despite their ongoing vigilance, this did not halt the decline in the oil levels of the affected engine. Upon reaching an altitude exceeding 11,000 feet, they observed a concerning development. The oil level had plummeted to 0. The pilots were still deliberating the accuracy of the oil quantity reading, as the drop was both sudden and unexpected, with both oil temperature and pressure readings remaining stable. However, when the oil pressure readings began to decrease shortly thereafter, it became evident that a serious issue had arisen within the engine's oil system. The most plausible explanation was a leak in the affected engine, a situation the pilots were unaware of at that moment. This issue was later traced back to an error made during the installation process by technicians during the C-check inspection. It was discovered that the technicians had not adhered to the specific instructions outlined in the Airbus Aircraft Maintenance Manual for the installation of the oil filter elements, opting instead to follow procedures from the General Maintenance Handbook, which bore a superficial resemblance. The outcome of their actions resulted in the premature installation of the oil filter, which was not yet technically suitable for such a procedure. This led to a compromised alignment of the filter locator pin. The situation deteriorated further due to the incorrect positioning of a vital component, the black O-ring, which was erroneously placed on the drain plug instead of its designated position on the filter cover. Over the course of the subsequent 13 flights, leading up to Flight 117, engine vibrations progressively weakened the alignment of the oil filter elements. Ultimately, during Flight 117, this misalignment reached a critical failure point as the oil pressure for the number 2 engine continued to decline, triggering a low oil pressure warning on the ECAM. The pilots promptly consulted their reference handbook to assess the precarious situation. Despite being at an altitude of approximately 21,000 feet, it became evident to the pilots that an immediate shutdown of the number 2 engine was necessary to prevent further complications. Although the operational procedures permitted the Airbus A321 pilots to continue flying with a single operational engine, the airport in Baltimore was still over 5 hours away. Continuing the flight under such uncertain conditions posed significant risks. Consequently, the pilot determined that the safest course of action was to execute an emergency landing at the nearest airport, which was the same airport from which they had departed, KEIK. The captain then issued a pan-pan emergency call to inform air traffic control. The management of the situation on Flight 117 involved a strategic decision to return to KEIK, which was prudent. However, it encountered a significant obstacle. The aircraft's fuel tanks were predominantly full. This condition rendered the aircraft excessively heavy for the intended landing, unless the pilots could devise a method to reduce the fuel weight. The challenge of fuel load reduction was further complicated by the fact that the Airbus A321 lacks a fuel dumping system, a feature commonly found in larger aircraft. Consequently, the option to discharge fuel into the ocean was not available. This limitation left the pilots with two alternatives. They could either circle the new destination for an extended period to burn off sufficient fuel, or proceed with an overweight landing. The first option posed its own risks, as it involved flying longer on a single engine, the status of which was uncertain following the earlier incident. Ultimately, the pilots opted for the second alternative, executing an overweight landing, a decision fraught with its own dangers. With one engine already compromised, the pilots had to depend on the aircraft's landing gear and systems, which were crucial for a successful emergency landing, hoping that these vital components would not fail. Meanwhile, in the cabin, some passengers began to perceive that something was amiss with the malfunctioning engine. To mitigate any potential panic, the flight attendants took measures to reassure them that the situation was under control. As the minutes progressed, the situation continued to unfold. The pilots demonstrated their ability to manage the situation effectively through meticulous attention and effort. They diligently navigated through all necessary checklists while maintaining continuous communication with air traffic control, the flight attendants, and one another. Their actions were aimed at ensuring the aircraft remained under control despite the challenging circumstances. In the ensuing minutes, the flight crew adjusted the aircraft's trajectory to align with the new flight path and initiated the approach back to Keek, assisted by the approach controllers in the tower. During this period, the captain assumed control from the first officer, who continued to liaise with ground personnel to confirm the readiness of emergency services. Shortly thereafter, Flight 117 began its descent as the pilots prepared for an overweight landing procedure. The captain carefully calibrated all essential parameters to mitigate the impact of the excess fuel still in the tanks. The aircraft's flaps were fully extended to maximize lift and reduce the rate of descent. Once the captain was content with the aircraft's speed, he deployed the landing gear, followed by the activation of the speed brakes as the aircraft neared the runway, further decelerating the heavy plane. With the runway just a few feet away, it was crucial for the captain to evaluate the effectiveness of the landing configuration. Should the setup prove inadequate, the aircraft faced the risk of overrunning the runway, or, even more critically, the potential failure of the landing gear under the weight of the aircraft. An incident that could have resulted in a catastrophic fire was fortunately averted for all individuals aboard Flight 117, thanks to the pilot's diligent preparations and the captain's unwavering focus. At 4:23 p.m. local time, the aircraft successfully executed a challenging landing maneuver, touching down on the KFIC runway in such a controlled manner that an observer might not have realized the plane was significantly overweight. Passengers, who had briefly feared they might face their last moments, had no choice but to applaud the pilot's expert handling of the situation. Emergency services, who arrived promptly, likely anticipated extensive rescue operations, but were met with an aircraft that had sustained minimal external damage. The passengers and crew were subsequently evacuated, and the plane was moved to the terminal for a thorough inspection to ascertain the cause of the engine malfunction. The investigation commenced at KFIC Airport, focusing on the No. 2 engine. Inspectors discovered that the interior of the engine's cowling was damp with engine oil, and the oil drain plug on the main oil supply filter was found to be loose. Additionally, a loose safety wire was identified, necessitating more comprehensive inspections to uncover any further hidden issues within and around the affected engine, as well as the seemingly unaffected engine. Ultimately, it was revealed that the No. 1 engine also exhibited a similar oil leak in its cowling and had lost approximately 5 liters of engine oil. The corresponding oil drain plug and safety wire of the engine were also discovered to be inadequately secured. The final report of the investigation was published on August 9, 2021. The Icelandic Transport Safety Authority concluded that the likely cause of the serious incident was the improper installation of the black O-ring, which resulted in an oil leak during the event. The report also criticized Adriatica for failing to adhere to the Airbus Aircraft Maintenance Manual subtask correctly during the C-check. Additionally, it highlighted design flaws in the oil filter element and the oil filter cover, which could potentially lead to incorrect assembly during replacements. The identification of similar issues in both engines of the affected aircraft prompted WOW Air to inspect all Airbus planes in its fleet that featured a comparable drain plug mechanism. By the conclusion of this investigation, 3 additional aircraft were found to have similar oil filter problems. Adriatica was also mandated to examine all Airbus aircraft in its hangar with the same drain plug mechanism, resulting in the discovery of 1 aircraft with a loose oil drain plug installation. The findings indicated that the issue with the engine oil filter might also have a structural component. Consequently, Safran Aircraft Engines, the manufacturer of the A321 CFM56-5B engines, was called in to provide assistance. The company subsequently issued a revised supply filter design through a service bulletin the following year to mitigate the risk of incorrect assembly due to the alignment of the filter element pin. In March 2019, the aviation industry witnessed the filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy by an airline just a few months after a significant incident, which was still under investigation at that time. This airline, which had been in operation for merely 8 years, faced insurmountable operational losses that it could no longer sustain despite its previous achievements. The narrative surrounding WOW Air Flight 117 serves as a poignant reminder of how easily a situation could have escalated into a disaster were it not for the composure and quick decision-making of the pilots who successfully navigated the distressed aircraft to safety under extremely challenging conditions. This account underscores the critical role of skilled and confident pilots who are willing to make courageous choices regardless of how unconventional they may appear. What are your thoughts on the pilot's actions? Please share your opinions in the comments section below.